A Course in Miracles, the shorthand notes, manuscripts of Helen Schuckman, first unproofed draft of the text volume. That's what I'm reading from. A Course in Miracles, the notes of Helen Schuckman. A miracle is a correction. A miracle is a correction factor introduced into false thinking by capital M me. So Jesus of Nazareth is thought about as the author of this book. So um, a miracle, joy, peace, strength, goodness, thought, word, or action. A miracle is a correction factor introduced into false thinking. So it's all about the mind with ACIM. Everything is about the mind. And um, so Holy Spirit, Jesus of Nazareth, spiritual forces, um, help with bringing miracle mindedness um, into someone in terms of thoughts leading to words and actions, which are filled with grace, joy, peace, strength, goodness, love, care, consideration, honesty, goodness, etc., etc. Those types of thoughts would be miracles about anything um, as a correction factor to undo the ego mentality. So plenty of sentences in A Course in Miracles about undoing the ego mentality, transforming the ego mentality, I believe is an expression in here. Um, but you know, ego mentality, any negative emotion, remorse, feelings of deprivation, grievances, doubt, fear, remorse, anxiety, loneliness, worry, sadness, etc., etc. Any negative emotion would be ego, and miracle emotions of joy, peace, strength, goodness um, are corrections for the negative mental ego energy, to undo the negative mental ego energy. So it says here, introduced into false thinking by capital M me. So introduced into false thinking by spirit. It acts as a catalyst, shaking up erroneous perception and snapping it into place. This correction factor places man under the atonement principle, where his perception is healed. Until this has occurred, perception of the divine order is impossible. True depth perception becomes possible only at the highest order of perceptual integration. So, miracle mindedness acts as a catalyst, um, undoing the negative mental ego energy, any feelings of doubt, fear, remorse, feelings of deprivation, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's being undone. Every moment should be wholly joyous, supremely happy, perfect joy, perfect peace, perfect freedom, perfect love, et cetera, et cetera. That's how every moment is supposed to be. Every thought, word, and action. Um, so, um, miracle mindedness acts as a catalyst, shaking up erroneous perception. So, I'm reading from A Course in Miracles, the notes of Helen Schuckman. Um, Shaking up erroneous perception and snapping it into place. Um, this is all probably in um, the CE version by Robert Perry, the CE version, the complete edition of A Course in Miracles by Robert Perry. Maybe not in the FIP. Maybe some of this is in the FIP, but not all. But um, I mean, the goal is to have nothing but the God mind, the Jesus like mind, in terms of calmness, patience, stillness, strength, goodness, all of that, moment to moment with every thought. So you could say snapping the mind into place. That's appropriate enough. Um, this correction factor. So reading from A Course in Miracles, the notes of Helen Schuckman. This correction factor places man under the atonement principle, where his perception is healed. Um, The atonement principle, oneness with God. As an individual person, there's one sentence in the book, something like, God gave everything to everyone as individuals so that they could share it and increase their joy. I'm paraphrasing, but there's a sentence like that in the book. So this is all about being an individual mind and spirit. I, you, or anyone is not an individual body in the sense that we're not taking our body with us. The body is a temporary vehicle, would be a word for it. So the body, can have useful purposes while it's being used, but eternally speaking, every human being is as an eternal mind and spirit. So uh, living perfectly in the will of God, living perfectly in the will of God, thinking as God thinks, that would be the atonement principle. Where, all right, reading from A Course in Miracles, Notes of Helen Schuckman, where his perception is healed. Um, perception, being, what we do, think, and say, perception. Every thought, word, and action is filled with joy, peace, and strength. So reading from A Course in Miracles, until this has occurred, perception of the divine order is impossible. The divine order, capital D, divine, capital O, order. So, there are the laws of God. There's a sentence in the manual says the mind can be right or wrong. So there is a right way and a wrong way to go about absolutely everything. False beliefs are also idols. Aside from material things, false beliefs are also idols. So there's a correct belief about everything spiritual. There's a correct way to go about every thought. There's a correct way to go about every word spoken, and there's a correct way to go about every physical action. Everything humans do as physical beings, in terms of physicality, there's a right and a wrong way to go about absolutely everything that's done physically as a body, as a person. So, um, um, living that way, living in the perfect divine order, or the laws of God is an expression in this book. There's a sentence like, God created the law by creating by it. So if someone is uncomfortable about anything physical to any degree, any negative emotion, anything that's not supremely happy about doing anything physically, um, that's not the will of God. It's ego behavior. And the goal is the perfect will of God, moment to moment, in terms of perceiving, living in the divine order of all things, mental, physical, spiritual, perfect joy, peace, strength, goodness, supremely happy, moment to moment, is how we truly are. That's our capital S self. That's how we were created. And anything that's not supremely happy is ego, thought, word, or action. So, perception of the divine order um, is impossible until a Jesus like mind is attained, a Jesus like mind, the mind of Jesus at his baptism. Until that type of mind is attained, perception of the divine order is impossible. All right, reading from A Course in Miracles, the notes of Helen Schuckman. True depth perception becomes possible only at the highest order of perceptual integration. So depth perception, in terms of the real truths about spirituality, God himself. I mean, one truth is God is a personal being. The first person of the Trinity is a personal being. So is the second person of the Trinity. So is the third person of the Trinity. All three members of the Trinity are personal beings. That would be an understanding, a truth, depth perception about real spiritual truth, and how to go about everything mentally, physically, spiritually, correctly, so that there's nothing but perfect, supreme happiness moment to moment in terms of everything everyone does. Every moment, thought, word, and action is supremely happy moment to moment. That's who we actually are. That's our capital S selves. So depth perception about how to go about everything um, becomes possible. So reading from A Course in Miracles becomes possible only at the highest order of perceptual integration. So, I mean, this book does say something about, like a sentence says, this is a course in mind integration. So it is all about understanding how to be perfectly joyous, happy, peaceful, good, moment to moment in every way, moment to moment. Zero resentments, doubts, angers, annoyances, zero of all of that, moment to moment. That would be integrating the mind to so that the mind, can have thoughts which lead to words and actions that are nothing but perfect joy, peace, strength, goodness in every thought, word, and action, moment to moment. Reading from A Course in Miracles, the Notes of Helen Schuckman. The spiritual eye is the mechanism of miracles because what the spiritual eye perceives is truth. The spiritual eye, capital S spiritual eye, perceives both the creations of God and the creations of man. Among the creations of man, it can also separate the true from the false by its ability to perceive totally rather than selectively. It thus becomes the proper instrument for reality testing, which always involves the necessary distinction between the true and the false. So this is probably in Robert Perry's book, maybe not in the FIP. The spirit. So reading from A Course in Miracles, the spiritual eye, capital S spiritual eye, is the mechanism of miracles because what the spiritual eye perceives is truth. So everything is about perfectly doing the will of God. The word surrender is not in this book anywhere, but that idea applies. I mean, surrender to the will of God, or live the will of God, or it's the same idea. So, um, living the will of spiritual forces, spiritual help. Whether that spiritual force is thought about as God Himself or Jesus of Nazareth or the Holy Spirit is talked about in this book as the spirit that helps us achieve the God mind. God Himself cannot get personally involved with ego mentality, so He sends the Holy Spirit to help man achieve His will. That would be one of the ideas in this book, I believe. So, but anything about living perfectly as spirit would have us live, that would be the idea, however anybody understands that idea. Certainly, it's necessary to believe in the truths of spiritual realities. Um, Currently, in this moment, Jesus of Nazareth is a spirit being, an individual spirit being in the spiritual realm who has a function. He is in charge of the brotherhood of mankind and things of that nature. These ideas are talked about in this book. So, there's a sense in the book like we did not, or IU or anyone did not make love. Love is created by God. So to understand what real love is, um, IU or anyone has to um, live according to what spirit wants me to think, say, or do. And in that there is perfect joy, perfect peace, perfect freedom, perfect love, perfect goodness, perfect charity, etc., etc. Um, so spirit is always, correct. Spirit is always the truth in terms of everything, thought, word, and action, and uh, always perfect joy, peace, strength, goodness. Okay, so reading from A Course in Miracles, the spiritual eye perceives both the creations of God and the creations of man. So there's a sentence in the book, I'm paraphrasing, something like the Holy Spirit, as far as the mind of any given person, the Holy Spirit um, uh, helps to helps to undo that which is totally incorrect in terms of beliefs, thoughts, purifies those thoughts that are not fully correct, and then, of course, uh, fosters those thoughts that are truly godlike or Jesus-like. So the spiritual eye perceives both the creations of God and the creations of man. So the creations of God, then in ACIM terms, perfect joy, peace, strength, goodness. The creations of man, in ACIM terms, ego mentality, doubt, fear, remorse, anxiety, feelings of deprivation, grievances, resentments, annoyances, etc., etc. Among the creations of man, it can also separate the true from the false by its ability to perceive totally rather than selectively. So the Holy Spirit sees everything about the big picture, I would say, in terms of everything that's going on in any given moment about everything. So the Holy Spirit can perceive every moment concerning everyone and anyone totally rather than not. So the Holy Spirit knows the big picture truth to anything in terms of everything about every moment and can guide me, you, or anyone to thinking, saying, and doing those things which are in accord with the will of God and perfect in terms of perfect joy, peace, strength, goodness. Um, and so the Holy Spirit, you know, uh, separates the true from the false, undoes the false beliefs, and grows the true beliefs. It thus becomes the proper instrument for reality testing, which always involves the necessary distinction between the true and the false. It thus becomes the proper instrument for reality testing, which always involves the necessary distinction between the true and the false. So, ACIM. This book uses the phrase right-minded and wrong-minded quite a bit. Um, and as I said, there's one sentence in the manual about the mind can be right or wrong. So it is all about the true and the false in terms of everything: physical, mental, emotional, behavior, all of it, spiritual beliefs, all of it. What is true and what is false? Anything that's false in any way leads to not supremely happy, not perfect peace, not perfect joy, not perfect strength. Um, so there is a necessary distinction between that which is the will of God and that which is ego mentality. So, reading from A Course in Miracles, the notes of Helen Schuckman: the miracle dissolves error because the spiritual eye identifies error as false or unreal. This is the same as saying that by seeing light, darkness automatically disappears. So, um, again, the spirit within man working with man in terms of his mind, the miracle, anything that is joy, peace, strength, goodness, uh, dissolves error, undoes negative mental ego energy in terms of doubt, fear, remorse, anxiety, any negative emotion. The miracle dissolves error, undoes that energy. There's a sentence in the book, all thought creates form. So all the thoughts I, you, or anyone has ever had over our entire lifetime, all those thoughts unseen, all those unseen thoughts have created form, and it's that form in terms of beliefs that has to be undone. If it's negative mental ego beliefs, it has to be undone. Um, so that's what the Holy Spirit's task is, to undo that negative mental ego energy, and he will only do it if I, you, or anyone ask him to do it. Um, the miracle dissolves error because the spiritual eye identifies error as false or unreal. This is the same as saying that by seeing light, darkness automatically disappears. So this book very often uses analogies, I suppose is the right word, for the ego mentality. So darkness would be, a way of describing the ego mentality. So Light, light, joy, peace, strength, goodness, light being eternal, thinking of light as eternal. When light is present, darkness automatically disappears. So when the God mind is present in terms of joy, peace, strength, goodness, the Jesus-like mind, similar to the mind of Jesus that he had at his baptism, that's the goal for everyone, to achieve that type of mind. So having that type of mind, in terms of light or goodness, joy, peace, anything negative about the ego mentality automatically disappears. So, symbolically speaking, there's a real truth in terms of the physical realm that light automatically dispels darkness. This has always been true for all time. All right, reading from A Course in Miracles, the notes of Helen Schuckman. Darkness is lack of light. It does not have unique properties of its own. It is an example of the scarcity fallacy from which only error can proceed. Again, I think this is in Robert Perry's book, maybe not in the FIP, or edited in the FIP, maybe. But so the book is saying that darkness does not have unique properties of its own. It's simply lack of light. So ego mentality, in a sense, does not have properties of its own because it's not the will of God. If it's not the will of God, it's not eternal. It's a temporary problem that man has made because man has as much power as God to create thoughts and beliefs. And if those thoughts and beliefs are not the will of God, they don't technically exist because they're not the will of God. So they don't exist in eternity. They're a temporary problem to be undone. So it is an example of the scarcity fallacy from which only error can proceed. I think there is a sentence like that in the book. All right, so those who so reading from ACIM, the notes of Helen Schuckman, those who perceive and acknowledge that they have everything have no need for driven behavior of any kind. So, again, our great example, Jesus of Nazareth, around the time of his baptism, when he has, the perfect mind in terms of joy, peace, strength, goodness, none of those negative emotions. Those who perceive and acknowledge that they have everything in that sense. Perfect joy, peace, strength, goodness, knowledge of not being a body and things of this nature, have no need for driven behavior of any kind. So driven behavior would be behavior that is pressing. The ego, ACIM has sentences in the book about, the ego speaks first and loudest. And so if there's anything pressing on the mind, that would be the ego mentality wanting to do it. Everything should be done from a very relaxed, calm, strong, still standpoint. There's never any rush for anything ever in the God mind. So driven behavior of any kind is always of the ego mentality, and always will lead to remorse, feelings of deprivation, doubt, fear, remorse, anxiety, etc., etc. Some negative emotion will always be the result of driven behavior because it's coming from ego, from an ego place, from ego mentality.